Hello and welcome to Unparliamentary Language, a podcast that gives you the down low on BoJo and if the no deal's a go-go.
Could you tell I had fun writing that one?
Yeah, I mean, all this talk of BoJo sounds a bit like the Jadoon from Doctor Who, who I believe say something like Scopotrono Fojo Kofo Todo, or Nobo Hosho Koro Tosho Bokataso Fopapapabojo, or something like that.
Exactly.
I tried to find a version of that.
See, when you said that, my thoughts turned to David Tennant going, "A platoon of Jadoon on the moon," which again is like a nice little bit of rhyming there, which I enjoy. Anyway,
so how have you been, Rob? Other than writing fun things for me to say?
yeah, I've been very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I've just got in from Edinburgh. It is a long train. I've spent my weekend singing. So hopefully my voice is okay after a weekend of singing like choral things. But I mean, I'm not really, maybe my voice is a bit lower because I've just been singing like big low notes, like bottomies and stuff, which is quite fun. All the kind of Alleluia, that kind of stuff, just under the knee. It's nice. I just stay on one note. Everyone else does the funny bits over the top.
Gosh, I never pinned you as a choir boy, but now I just can't get the image out of my head. We should probably move swiftly on.
Final headline we want to bring to your attention is a front page from The Sun that I'm just going to post here, and it'll be in the show notes. I mean, just wow, it's horrific. Frankly, it's a crime against Photoshop, and it John Sun with Sun spelled S-U-N like the newspaper. Yeah. What I mean, the more I look at it, the worse it gets.
Yeah, it looks like you were watching the Teletubbies and had a bit too much, and this nightmare appeared in front of you. It's terrible. I was astonished that made it onto the front cover of a national newspaper. But the Sun haven't been shy about their support for Boris over the coming weeks, it's fair to say. And given that he became PM on one of the hottest days of the year, it was no surprise that they would try and tie the two stories together. However, even I'm a fan of puns. You've heard my intros. You've heard me speak. I am a big fan of wordplay, but I consider this incredibly lazy wordplay backed up by a terrifying image. And, if that appeared in The Sun, I would quickly become nocturnal, I think. So, I just had to point that out there as, top of the list of bad front covers that our newspapers have produced.
Following on from my comment about being a bad Photoshop, there's several tweets in that link that you've provided, and one of them is, "I hate to critique a fellow Photoshopper, but unless they were going for a hairy yellow space hopper, I think this should have stayed in the drafts folder." And it's just so bad. Like there's like no blending. They've just been like, it's yellow, it'll be fine. There's a few other hot takes, quite like and there's a few I can't say. At least one alluding to the Teletubbies. I genuinely think that the official newspaper of a dictatorship would have been too embarrassed to print this, from Owen Jones. That's pretty strong.
Yeah.
Owen Jones. I'm ready for the asteroid now. Yeah. And the United Kingdom is officially cancelled. Yeah. It's pretty bad.
It is. My suspicion is that somewhere exists a photo of, that photo photoshopped, but it doesn't have Boris Johnson's hair. And I wonder if they did that and decided that was too scary, or they had to put the hair in to make it recognisable. Because I think the hair being within the Sun is the thing that makes it unsettling in a way. But anyway, I think we've addressed that it is.
Yeah. So obviously with all this talk of Boris, we're going to move on to our first main story of the evening, and that is, of course, the new leader of a party, Jo Swinson, leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Yes. Can you tell? I kind of searched a bit high and wide for headlines on Jo becoming the new leader, and although her sort of face made it onto a couple of front pages, everybody was a bit more concerned about the vote that was coming, the day after for PM. So this sort of shows you the struggles, or shows you one of the uphill battle that the Lib Dems have as a party. They don't immediately have that newspaper as a cheerleader, so even something as significant as a new leader will fail to get on the front cover. But I did think it was worth pointing out it is a slightly new direction for the Lib Dems, and it comes with baggage, and I think, Jo Swinson as leader is a good case study for the direction the Lib Dems are going in and the type of voter that they want to, attract. So I've got sort of Jo's manifesto up.
So yeah, her manifesto is called Why Should You Vote For Me? Well, Jo Swinson, Why Should You Vote For Me? It's on the Liberal Democrats website. Yeah, so do we want to go through that? Just the bullet points, or?
Well, giving it a little read, and I think there's sort of like 2 bullet points here. One, that, the political system is fracturing, she's put there, which basically means we believe that the Conservatives and Labour are moving further to the right and further to the left, respectively. So we are now the new party of the middle ground. That's something that the Lib Dems have been trying to get forward for a while now, and she's reiterating that. And the other thing, which they can just put in big capital letters, is bollocks to Brexit, or stop Brexit. Basically, that's been the Lib Dem slogan. That's what they wanted to do, and she's just, kept it going forward. To be fair, there was very little difference between her and Ed Davey as leader. I believe that Jo sort of provided a far more youthful feel to the party, and, she is, of course, the first female leader of the Liberal Democrats, so there's that sort of like unique angle for her. She'll be able to promote women's rights, particularly as, you've got Theresa May going out as a female leader. To have another one coming back into the political scene, does make it, quite a big coup for the Lib Dems. I think that leaves only the Labour Party that hasn't had a female leader at the moment, of the main political parties. If I'm thinking, of like, the SNP, the Greens have, the Conservatives have, and now the Lib Dems have. It's a slight coup for the Lib Dems.
Yeah, and I think it is a good thing, because Ed Davey's fine. He's actually my local MP. But it would have just been. Vince Cable stepped down basically because he was a caretaker leader. He was a bit older, and they wanted a more youthful candidate. But I feel like getting Ed Davey, who'd been in a fairly high position in the coalition and stuff, back in while he had some experience, it does just, people keep complaining, reasonably so in my opinion, that politics is a lot of rich old white men essentially. And I think it's a good thing to have a female leader instead of the Lib Dems. Although they both kind of had similar kind of backgrounds, right? Because she was also involved in the coalition, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's right. So she joined the coalition in 2012, basically covering employment relations and consumer affairs. And then later she had the role of Women's Equalities Minister. Because of this involvement in the coalition, she then lost her seat in 2015 to the SNP because her constituent was up in Scotland. But then, thanks to Theresa May's, snap general election, she was able to regain her seat in 2017, which is, sort of that mirrors the kind of fortunes of the Lib Dems, rising in 2010, taking a real hit in 2015, and then starting to come back a little in 2017. And arguably, I think that they are, although 2017 didn't see them roaring back, they've only got a handful of MPs when you compare them to the Labour and Conservative Party. Their recent surge in the polls suggests that they could take rather a few more seats if there was a general election called by the end of this year. However, with that, and kind of with any MP that was part of that coalition government, and particularly within the Lib Dems, those who had the most kind of skill and experience will have been those who were promoted to junior minister positions in the coalition. They'll have that baggage which will always work against them when particularly people on the left and the Labour Party will look to attack the leader. So there was a Labour press briefing that came out within, half an hour of the result being announced, saying, here's Jo Swinson and here's her voting record on, quite a few things. So I've got a list here. So on welfare, she's voted to cut payments for those people with illness or disability. Economic policy, she voted against increased income tax for those earning over £150,000, voted against the tax on bankers' bonuses, voted to cut funding for young people, voted slowing increase of rail fees, voted against restricting fees that landlords can charge tenants. These were all votes that came about as her part, in the coalition government where the Lib Dems were whipped and had to go with Conservative policies on an era that had a lot of austerity. So anybody who was part of that era is going to have to wear that electoral millstone around their neck, and that's what the Lib Dems have been dealing with since they took that decision in 2010. That line of attack is still consistent, and it will probably take a generation, or if they are to, if they were to stay as strong in the polls as they are now and they're able to get a new influx of MPs, that's the only way they can sort of break out of that cycle. Because at the moment, the pool of people they've got to draw from is relatively small and all kind of comes from that 2010 intake.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, one other thing that got picked up in Private Eye is that that a lot of Lib Dem voters are not big fans of nuclear power. And she, both her and Ed Davey are fine with nuclear power. And there was a lot of kind of them going around and basically kind of, it seems a bit weird that they're going out to constituents and being like, oh yeah, no, we're anti-nuclear power, but they are actually for it. Although, personally, I think the people who are against nuclear power just on principle probably aren't as read up on the issue as they should be, but that's just my personal opinion. I do remember seeing some protesters being like, oh, say no to, like, getting confused by fusion and fission at one point and, like, protesting a fusion plant. You're like, the whole point of that is that it's a good thing. Oh, well. But yeah. So with all those factors you've described, what I mean, other than the fact that we think it's good that there's a female leader of the Lib Dems, what is her appeal? Who does she appeal to? If she was this kind of minor person during the coalition, yeah, she maybe isn't as tarred with the same brush as people who are kind of fully in the coalition in a higher role. But who is she? How is she selling herself to voters? I mean, she obviously won her seat back, which is good news. That means she's got a good local support. But to the party as a whole, what's her kind of selling points?
So what she's going to do, basically, is try and focus and get the power vacuum that's appeared in the central ground of British politics. She's going to try and harness that and make sure that she can appeal to those sort of voters. So the type of voter I'm talking about is somebody who voted Remain in 2016. That's a must, with the Lib Dems policy, regarding Brexit. I would think it's a bit of a stretch to think anybody who voted Leave or would still vote Leave would now vote for the Liberal Democrats. She'll also appeal to those who may have voted New Labour in the past. So we're seeing that, when she's saying the Conservatives are moving to the right, Labour's moving to the left, you may have voted for Labour in the past. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that these people voted Labour in 2015 or 2017. We're talking about people who are firmly in the centre ground, who may have flipped between the Conservatives and the Labour Party before. The Lib Dems have this 20% figure. And this is, I think this represents those sort of floating voters in the centre who feel that they are politically homeless. Particularly those Conservatives who you've got Conservatives who voted Remain, who stuck with Theresa May, who voted for Theresa May in 2017, voted for David Cameron in 2015, but they also voted Remain. To see the party, and we'll go on to Boris, but I think it's quite clear that Boris has taken the Conservative Party in a very Brexity direction. Those people may all of a sudden feel more politically homeless than they did before. The more no deal becomes an actual possibility, the more they sort of see, the Brexit Party on the rise. That might take them to vote for somebody like the Lib Dems. And Jo is sort of like positioning herself in a quite like a New Labour position, the third way, the way in between the left and the right. This is the true way. So,
and I think we've mentioned before that the Liberal Democrats tend to sit on the slightly more fiscally conservative than Labour, even than New Labour was. So, and there's obviously a good portion of people who vote Conservative for that reason. And also maybe for like younger voters, you could see, because the Lib Dems generally are quite liberal and leftish on their kind of social policies. So you could see someone who might have been a young Conservative, but is put off by the concept of the Brexiteers being like, well, actually, that's a fit for me.
Yeah, certainly. And you've got, you mentioned those sort of like Liberal Democrats classically being against nuclear power. For me, that's a callback to when New Labour were in power. The Lib Dems were traditionally to the left of Labour. That was the space that they took up, and they were able to garner quite a good support base there of saying, oh yeah, we're more radical than Labour in some aspects, but our economic policy was roughly the same. They tended to be more sort of like on some social issues where people were more outspoken. They tended to be greener and speak up for rights that other parties just simply didn't take an interest in. They were classic third party. Now they can move into the ground that Labour have vacated, and we've touched on this on later episodes. The ground that Labour vacated as they moved to the left is ground that is fought after by like people like Change UK, people who thought that the Lib Dems, that their history of coalition government, only 9 years ago now was something that they could never recover from. Now the Lib Dems appear to have recovered from it, and they're embracing that centre ground now, and that's something that Joe will want to keep going, keep going forward with. Embrace that feeling and, hopefully capitalise on it if you're a Lib Dem supporter and see how far she can take the party. There is a struggle to get votes from, I think she'll lose some votes from Labour voters in particular. Some of those who voted Lib Dem in the European elections may find themselves going back to Labour if they disagree on some of Joe's voting record. But I will think that they'll make up for that in Conservative votes, and they'll be able to win key Conservative Liberal marginals, particularly in the Southwest, which used to be like a stronghold for the Lib Dems. I think that's the type of place that they'll be targeting in the next election.
Yeah, I don't think I have many more to add on that point. So I think we need to probably move on to the other leadership story of the week. Boris Johnson is now the leader of the Conservative Party, and therefore, because that's how it works, also the Prime Minister of the country.
Yeah. How does that sound, saying it? Do you feel yourself dying a bit inside?
It feels like it's sinking in. I've known this for we had some we were just not, we didn't have BBC News 24 on in the office, but everyone had the rolling BBC News on, and we all suspected it was going to be Boris, but he won pretty convincingly with 66% of the vote, which is 92,000 votes to Hunt's 42,000. So that is, that obviously that's what the Conservative Party wants. I don't think I'd have been happy either way, but I feel like I didn't. There's a part of me that always hoped it wasn't quite going to happen. I'm not a massive fan of Boris. I think I've probably made that clear on previous episodes. I think he was okay as a mayor of London. And in retrospect, there were lots of things that are worth criticising about his record as Mayor of London. So, yeah, I'm not sure he's the best man for the job. And I think we still have to wait to see how much of his stuff is bluster. I mean, he's already had this cabinet reshuffle that was pretty, severe. And if, that does worry me that he is going for this kind of no-deal Brexit idea. And we'll get to all of these points in turn, but you have the EU basically being well, you're not getting a new deal. So, yeah, it's not going to be a fun few months, I don't think.
No, and I think it slowly sunk in. I've had my fair few share of disappointments over the years, from Brexit to Trump to Boris. I think those two first disappointments really helped me to prepare for this one. I could see it coming, and I thought, right, I can, the worst has happened so far, so I can really prepare for the worst this time round. But yeah, it just seems it's still a little bit bizarre. I remember laughing when we had to say Boris Johnson Foreign Secretary. That sounded mad. Now saying Boris Johnson Prime Minister just seems like a bad joke. So, but it's our reality. It's something we have to deal with now. And in characteristic Boris fashion, he led his speech, or pointed out in his speech his plan for running the country, which was deliver, unite, and defeat, which he then pointed out spelt dud.
Dude.
No, the first bit he spelled.
Oh, yeah, the first bit spells dud. Sorry.
He said,
getting ahead of myself.
No, that's all right. But Boris set the joke up very well. He said, that deliver, unite, defeat, that spells dud. So we're going to energise the party as well, which spells dude. My aim tonight was trying to take those point by point and sort of flesh out what Boris means about those 4 points and see if he really can achieve those 4 aims. If this is Boris's manifesto for the country, let's try and hold him to that standard for minute one.
We want to go through those point by point. The first one, deliver, and he means deliver Brexit. I'm pretty certain is the main point there.
Yeah, basically. This is Johnson, he sees this as the most important achievement. We've talked about it in previous episodes. It's important for the country, but probably more, for Johnson, it's probably more important for the Conservative Party, who were leaking votes to the Brexit Party and see the only way of, surviving is to get Brexit done by the 31st. This plan is already set in motion, and he's been clear, and probably clearer than Theresa May was, particularly when it comes to no deal. So he's already got Michael Gove out there saying that No deal is assumed by the government, and then they're making preparations. This is something that Brexiteers have always wanted. So they often saw the idea of having no deal off the table as a sign of weakness. So, if the whole point there being is that if we're not able to sort of stare down the European Union and say, no, we really will do no deal, and then you'll be the ones who'll pay, they're waiting for the EU to blink to see if they will offer Johnson something better, better than May had, which they'll need to do if there's any chance of a deal passing through Parliament. The big risk, of course, with this strategy is that Europe just shrugs and says, go for it, do no deal, see if we care. And the noises coming out of Europe have kind of been mixed. I think you've got, I know Donald Tusk passed on his congratulations, as did Juncker, and there may be a little wiggle room. But again, finding a Brexit deal that passes through a parliament that is very much opposed to no deal has Brexiteers that consistently voted against May's deal, and also those sort of Remainers within the Conservative Party that are prepared to vote against the no deal. It's an awkward tightrope for Johnson to sort of navigate and go across. The next point I wanted to point out was that in order to deliver Brexit, Boris has made some key changes to his cabinet, and the situation has changed from when May was in charge. So with May, you had key Brexiteers in what people thought as Brexit positions. So Boris Johnson was Foreign Secretary; he could deal with speaking to other countries. Fox was on trade, and David
disgraced former Defence Secretary Fox.
Thank
to
you.
Give him his full title.
Cheers, thank you very much. The Brexit bulldog David Davis was Brexit Secretary, and Andrea Leadsom was Leader of the House, essentially the person who made sure that the Brexit business got priority and made it past BoJo, and so we could vote on it. The one sort of key weakness that Brexiteers had with this plan was that Remainers held other key positions. So although May in her time in charge came across as Brexiteer-in-chief, there were those within the party that saw her as somebody who had campaigned for Remain and who wanted a soft Brexit. So, they didn't really trust May to deliver them the Brexit that they wanted. This sort of became clear when the deal came across from the EU and was agreed by Theresa May. David Davis resigned and complained that his advice was ignored and that his influence as Brexit Secretary was minimal in those negotiations, saying that the post of Brexit Secretary was just a made-up thing to keep Brexiteers happy. There was no point having it if the PM didn't back you. Also, you had people like Philip Hammond, who was Chancellor of the Exchequer, who made it very clear that he wanted to avoid a no deal from the start, basically on the assumption that the economic cost would be huge. And it's always assumed, we've seen it back with previous leaders, you've seen it with Blair and Brown, that although Blair had a lot of power, the person who controls the purse strings has, an equal say about where we go and what direction the country goes in. If the PM has an idea and the Exchequer says we can't afford that, then that's going to affect their thinking. So in response, Boris has sort of made sure that Brexiteers now hold every main cabinet position that you have, as well as the other Brexit positions that May gave them. So I was just going to go through the main list. We've mentioned a few before, so...
Well, I think we should probably do this in full. And I think one thing I want to touch on is that there's a common rebuff you see to people complaining about Boris Johnson, which is the famous argument that if you start attacking a person and not their policies, then you're, it's because you've run out of arguments to level against them. And I think when we're talking about some of these people, we're going to mention up stuff that is in their previous record, and it's not we're judging them based on their actions that are out in public here, or at least we're trying our best to do that in a measured way. It's not there is a certain lovable charm to the way Boris is a bit kind of oafish and stuff. And I mean, while I think he might make some gaffes in, he definitely has offended people. And that there's that famous list of places Boris Johnson hasn't offended, and it's not many places. But there is a reason that there's people. He's very Marmite. People who like him because he has that kind of almost boyish charm, and people who dislike him tend to dislike him for the same reason. But it's kind of it's the stuff he has done when he's been in positions of power, like lots of the kind of wasted money that happened when he was mayor of London, that gives us cause for concern. I think we've probably mentioned Boris enough on previous episodes, but I think, we're going to hopefully try and stick to things these people have previously done that makes us wary of their appointment to these various positions. I just think I wanted to say that up front. So I think we have first is Sajid Javid as Chancellor. And I think he's probably one of the ones, as we said, we kind of quite liked him when we were talking about possibilities for Conservative leaders. I know he's done a few things when he was he Department for Trade at one point?
He was Home, and he was Home Secretary as well. Most recently. So he's come across as he's right wing obviously, but tends to be, seems to be like quite harsh when it came to crime and punishment. Also he's a Brexiteer, and even though he ran against Johnson in the leadership election, his reward for his loyalty is he's now Chancellor. He's not one I wanted to dwell on in particular, because like I said, I believed he would probably not be a bad leader, all things said. But he's certainly on the right wing of the party, and I think the more significant thing is that the person he's replaced is Philip Hammond. He's quite opposite to the way Philip Hammond was in his policies, and will certainly be a chancellor that will look to prepare for no deal and enable it, and try and, he'll be the one trying to sell it as an economic opportunity rather than, an economic disaster if no deal happens. And in that, Boris Johnson has a reliable cheerleader in Sajid Javid.
And then I think this list is mostly in the order of kind of seniority of job or kind of importance. Next up is Home Secretary, which has gone to Priti Patel. And I mentioned in the kind of Patreon bonus bit that I definitely have some doubts about someone who was, previously was a minister for, it was international development, I believe, or international development and trade. And she was kicked out of that position for going on holiday, as she put it, but going and having chat with, I think it was the Israelis she was chatting with privately. And that's not okay. That's against the ministerial code of conduct and everything. And I don't think that's one of those things that we should let be forgotten. It's not a push this under the rug. Oh, she's had a stern telling. Like, that is that's misconduct. And honestly, I feel like we should have stricter rules in place for when these kind of things happen with MPs. It's surprising to me that she can just go and get a position in the cabinet again. Yeah,
certainly. And the way that she was dismissed was odd as well. She sort of waited to be fired and said, "Come on, May, fire me," and then didn't seem to give a damn when it happened. Like, "Oh, I didn't want your stupid job anyway," kind of.
It's very interesting looking at newspaper articles in that time, because they're like, "Oh, it's like the second or third cabinet member leaving in a short period of time," and like, and obviously now looking back on it, like, it was a bit of trouble for May, but realistically, it all blew over quite quickly. And everyone's like, "Oh, the government's going to collapse over this." It's quite interesting looking back on what people thought at the time, because obviously, as we know, Theresa May kept on going for a lot longer than that.
I think also the only other point to add is that in her position as Home Secretary for Law and Order, Priti Patel is somebody who has put forward her support for the death penalty, which is, not something I want in a Home Secretary, certainly.
No, I also feel it's very much a position that seems out of step with the public at large, because it's one of those things where they do polls fairly regularly, and the desire for the death penalty has dropped. It's definitely, I'm pretty certain it's well under 50% of the population who want it. So it's such a weird position to kind of nail yourself to the mast of, but because most people are against it.
Yeah, but those who are for it, I bet, would fall into the Brexit party voting bloc,
Yes, I would imagine there's an overlap there, yeah.
Yeah, so for that overlap and to appeal to that sort of voter, even if they're not going to enact it because there are several human rights legislations they have to, overturn for that to happen, going with a Home Secretary who holds that belief will at least appeal to one big chunk of the public. But as you mentioned, it might be a big turnoff for another equally, if not larger, section.
Yeah. Next up, and another person I think who has been put in a position where the direct criticism for them you'd think would rule them out of that job particularly. Foreign Secretary, so another important position, has gone to Dominic Raab. He was previously a Brexit Secretary. I think there's 2 points to mention here. One, he came back and complained about the Brexit deal that he himself had negotiated. which is a certain, a certain level of pluck there to try and suggest for something that he had been doing. Oh, it's terrible. It's the government's fault. But it's your fault. But also famously kind of forgot we were an island for a bit when talking about stuff to do with Brexit and the Channel Tunnel and things like that and the ferries, which again doesn't fill me with confidence for someone who's got to go and leave Britain to go talk to other countries.
Yeah, precisely. And it's a total loyalty pick. You're one of the Brexiteers. I think Dominic Raab would have been, if Boris Johnson had been stabbed in the back, like by Gove or by somebody else like he had last time in 2016, I think I would have put Raab as one of the front runners for that Brexit wing of the party. So again, this is his reward, his chance to see what he can do. But as you mentioned, his previous record when it comes to being a minister is not one that fills me with any great hope. And as we can see, we've gone along that list. That's probably like the 4 highest, most prestigious positions in the in government, and they are all arch Brexiteers. And that's sort of like the headline of this Boris Johnson government. We will get Brexit done, and we'll do it with our own people. Thank you very much.
I think we might spend a little less time on each of the following positions, but they're still going to just kind of run through the majority of the cabinet. I think we probably want to talk a bit about the Leader of the House of Commons when we get to that. So next up we have Stephen Barclay as the Brexit Secretary, and he was the Brexit Secretary in November as well. So that's not particularly surprising.
Yeah, that just shows business as usual, and kind of shows that the position of Brexit Secretary is also a bit of a joke. We knew that, we've mentioned plenty of times that Theresa May was the one who really negotiated that deal. Boris Johnson is probably going to be the person who really negotiates the next deal. So you just need somebody loyal to you who'll be able to, sell the deal when the time comes. And Stephen Barclay was able to do that under May. He'll be able to do it under Boris Johnson.
Next up, we have another friend of Boris, who famously stabbed him in the back, but they seem to be over that now. Govey baby, Michael Gove. This is definitely a position that I think our international listeners will find interesting. He is the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. What's that, I hear you cry?
What's that, I hear me cry when he gets the position? Because I haven't heard of it.
So I saw this and I went, what's that? So what it turns out, basically the TLDR here is that it's as part of his duties, he has to do the administration of the estates and rents of the Duchy of Lancaster. But essentially, in modern times, it's a way to put someone into the cabinet without really giving them a position. I think he is expected to spend something like a day a week, or it might be a day a month, on actually doing his official duties as Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. But other than that, it's just a way to get your mate onto the cabinet without giving them a specific portfolio.
And if I was to give him an official title, it would be Minister for No Deal. He'll be the face of, we're preparing the civil service for no deal, we're getting everything in place. That will be Gove's responsibility. And although Michael Gove and Boris Johnson have quite a storied past, I think it's fair to say, he is still his mate, and giving him this position gives Gove that power. He's, bizarrely, for all Gove's faults, he's good in front of a camera, and will be able to communicate clearly with the public what's going on. He's already said today, and I mentioned it in the bit for the patrons only, that he's assuming that no deal will happen. That's the default position, and he's the one in charge of that. So yeah, we'll be interested to see what Gove does, and the fact that he's got in there kind of like on a freebie in this odd position shows you just how much Boris values him as a member of his cabinet. Next
up, we have our new Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace. I don't think there's much to say here, other than he's the first Remainer in that list we've gone through. And he was in the army. He seems like a traditional kind of fit for Defence Secretary. He was previously Security Minister, so it kind of makes sense. I don't know anything else about him.
No. Similar here, I think, as a Remainer and as a former member of the army, he'll be given orders from on high to say, you just deal with sorting the army out and don't mention Brexit and get on with your job. And he'll do just that.
And then our International Trade Secretary is now Liz Truss, who's another Boris supporter.
Yes, again, that's another sort of Boris appointment to say, thank you very much for supporting me. Here's a job in my cabinet. Yes, she'll do she'll do the deals that Fox tried to get through. Her role may become very important if no deal goes through. We'll see just how much work she has on her plate by November the 1st.
Then we have the Health and Social Care Secretary, Matt Hancock, who again was in the running for leadership, dropped out, endorsed Boris, and has been rewarded with a fairly decent top job. He is also another Remainer, but was okay with Theresa's Brexit plan. But I mean, I think that's kind of a position a lot of the Remainers are in now within the Conservative Party. And then also a fun note from the BBC article. He sees himself as tech savvy and was one of the first MPs to have his own smartphone app. I don't know what an app to deliver his news. I'm intrigued now.
I don't know, but he's certainly been, that position, Health and Social Care Secretary, again, is a position you can give to a Remainer because it has absolutely zero to do with Brexit at all, or particularly one. So that's why Boris is happy to just keep him there.
Real-time follow-up. His app is called Matt Hancock M.P, and it's basically just a wrapper for sending you news with like buttons and stuff built in. It almost looks like a wrapper for Facebook. I don't know why anyone would download this app.
You've intrigued me now. Can you get stats for how many people have downloaded apps? Because if you can...
has 226 reviews,
okay.
And I don't know if it says how many people have downloaded it.
Does it have a rating?
Installs 1,000 plus. Its rating is 3.4 star.
Okay.
And I'll read the top review at the moment, which is 2 stars. I accidentally loaded this as a niche porn site, but the content was generally very poor. It would be 1 star if I hadn't found a very satisfying dogging site in West Suffolk, of which I was previously unaware. That experience was memorable, and I've developed an on-off relationship with one of the members. Uploading pictures has been problematic. Which is like a brilliant fake review. Some of these are great. I accidentally let Matt Hancock MP access my photos, and now I'm worried he has seen my homework folder. Matt, those videos were put there by a hacker. I did not download them myself. Please believe me.
That sounds great.
So some of these were going to just get cut, but these are amazing. The first time I opened the app was very traumatic. Full screen Matt is just too overwhelming. There are also, I believe, racist overtones to the continual references to West Suffolk. East Suffolk is tired of this colonial attitude. They even mention Aldeburgh and Southwold. It's cultural appropriation of the worst sort. There's not enough in here about Ed Balls.
Ed Balls.
I was curious. Now I'm speechless. Would give 5 stars, but felt maybe there was too much Matt Hancock.
Part of me wants to download it for the joke. Part of me is horrified that an MP thinks that's the best way to sell himself. But yeah.
But yes, I hope that was a brief, funny aside. Next up, Theresa Villiers as Environment Secretary. I feel like I recognise her photo, but I don't think I recognise the name.
She was Northern Ireland Secretary, and as somebody who backs No Deal, particularly with the Irish backstop and all that includes, it's somebody that obviously Boris Johnson sees as an arch Brexiteer in chief. I think that just might be moving her away from a potentially problematic area if No Deal happens and shoving her somewhere like Environment Secretary. That's my ill-informed read of the situation. But again, another Brexiteer in a position, another reward for one of Boris's cheerleaders.
Then we have the Education Secretary is Gavin Williamson. Again, he was famously sacked for leaking stuff from the cabinet earlier this year. So, let's put him back in the cabinet. Seems like a solid plan.
This is another really odd one for me. Like, traditionally when you've done something like that, particularly when you've had a role as high as he did, he was a defence secretary, wasn't he, at the time when he got sacked? And for, the alleged spilling of national secrets, you usually don't get back into government once you've done something like that. But it's clear here that there was such a divide between May and her cabinet at this time that there are a lot of people who were just prepared to leave and say, look, I don't care. I can do what I want. Your authority is waning. I'll put my bets on serving the next guy. And that's exactly what people like Gavin Williamson and Priti Patel have done. It's quite the ambitious play, because if things go wrong for Boris Johnson or the direction of the Conservative Party changes again, then they'll certainly find themselves out of a cabinet position. But in the meantime, they're making the most of their opportunity. What Gavin particularly brings to education, I have no idea. He's a bit like Michael. I feel that there's something of the knight about Gavin Williamson. And the thought of him as education secretary scares me. But apart from that, I'm sure it'll be fine.
Next up, we have the culture secretary, Nikki Morgan. She's been around a fair bit. I think most people have probably heard of her. Famously fell out a bit with Theresa May. But she's been in the party for a long time, and she's kind of on the soft Brexit side, I think.
No, she used to be. She's quite Remainian, quite anti-no deal.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So this is one of this might be Boris's first attempt at keeping what he sees as one of the big Remainers in the party. So Nikki can have her voice heard. However, she's culture secretary, which is sort of the position. Was that the one that was, on the thick of it? They used to follow the culture secretary.
Yeah, I think so. They may have slightly made up the department.
Yeah, but it's one of those departments where you go, oh, what does that minister actually do? Kind of
it's the Department of Social Affairs and Citizenship, or DOSAC.
Yes, that's the one. It's essentially DOSAC she's got. The minister that's on the side that nobody really cares about, and certainly not one that can interfere with anything to do with Brexit. So she's been sidelined, but will be happy to be, within the cabinet. If there's a big push for no deal and there's big splits in the Conservative Party, I would put my money on Nikki Morgan being one of the first to resign her position. But for the moment, she's in the cabinet, and she's that sort of little sign of unity that Boris has in.
Next up, Business Secretary Andrea Leadsom, again another familiar name. She was previously an investment banker, so I can see why Business Secretary would maybe make sense. I don't really know much about what she's done in in ministerial business. I know that she was leader of the House of Commons before this, so yeah, I mean that seems fine as an appointment.
Yeah, I think that it's sort of a promotion for Andrea. Leader of the House of Commons is a role where it's a bit of a dog's body role. You're just organising the affairs of the House and doing that. So even though she was put there by Theresa May, some might see it as a bit of a punishment as well. A bit like making Boris Johnson Foreign Secretary was seen as a punishment by some. That oh goodness, he'll actually have to behave himself and go to foreign countries, all these foreign countries that he's offended. It must be the worst position for him to be in. Andrea will now feel a bit more sort of freedom and ability to express herself in this new business secretary role. And yeah, seeing it as a promotion, another bit of loyalty for it. I keep saying loyalty, but politics is all about that, really, particularly when it comes to picking your cabinet. You want to reward those who have supported you through thick and thin. And as we know, Boris had his supporters from very early on in his leadership campaign. Those are people who are all kind of vying for a position, and they'll be happy that they've finally got it.
So next up we have Amber Rudd as Work and Pensions and Women's and Equalities Minister.
Yeah, again, that was a close ally of Theresa May, still within the cabinet, clearly quite capable minister, but again, Work and Pensions keeps her well out of the way of Brexit. I think she's also changed her tune recently towards Brexit, kind of saying that she would support no deal if it was to go through, kind of making it clear that she has that collective cabinet responsibility, that she will follow Boris Johnson if forced that way. So it'll be interesting to see just how much she changes her point of view with Boris in charge.
Another one to mention is Grant Shapps as Transport Secretary. And I think this is less to mention him, but more to mention the fact that we have got rid of Chris Grayling, which, every cloud has a silver lining. As I say, I'm just going to share... we mentioned the thick of it earlier. I don't know if you know that there is a Twitter account for the Right Honourable Sir Peter Mannion MP, who is one of the fictional characters from that, and this tweet went out as that happened. Farewell, our shit and useless servant. Which I just think is awesome. So yeah.
Yeah, I think if you were PM, you had to get rid of Grayling. Nobody quite knew why he was still there or what he was doing. So yeah, even I'm happy about that one.
Don't know much about Grant Shapps. Otherwise, again, I think I recognise his picture. Yeah, he's for Welwyn and Hatfield, so kind of just outside of London. The party chairman is now James Cleverly.
Yeah, he's quite an outspoken person on Twitter. Again, another, big Brexiteer. And I think one of his tweets that he sent recently was, "I'm not allowed to he said, "I'm not allowed to take pictures in the House of Commons, but here's an emoji depicting the Labour front bench." And it was just lots of sad faces and then 2 really red, angry ones, which was responded to by a Labour MP who gave her take on the Conservative benches that just had a load of like different gurning faces and crazy faces and crying faces and the whole mixture of emotion with Boris behind it. And then the entirety of the front line was just the clown emoji. So, James Cleverly is not one who shies away from controversy, and as party chairman, he'll be able to sort of flex those muscles even more. You know, he'll be within the cabinet, but will have no responsibility other than making sure the party keeps in line. And again, appointing somebody like this who supports Brexit so avidly as James does, it shows you the clear direction that the new Conservative Party is taking.
Yeah, I'm going to quickly skip Rees-Mogg, and we'll come back to him in a second. So there's just 2 others before we get on to our the Leader of the House of Commons. 2 others I want to mention. There's Esther McVey is there as Minister for Housing, Communities and Local Government. So she was another one who kind of was thinking about throwing a hat. Did she throw a hat in the ring for the leadership contest in the end, or she was just in the shortlist?
I believe she did, but I think if she did, she got knocked out very early on.
And the other one to mention is Joe Johnson, Boris Johnson's brother. And I suppose when they get together and have a laugh, it's BoJo, JoJo, Ho-Ho.
Yes. It is.
But yeah, his brother, who just looks like an adult Boris Johnson. Like, he looks like his dad. It's hilarious.
Yes, he does.
Just want to draw everyone's attention to.
Joe Johnson is kind of, hey, nepotism at its finest. Also, Joe has kind of been somebody who has spoken out against his brother and been quite a solid Remainer and quite against no deal in the past. So to see him go into a cabinet where he'll have to... he's since called for another referendum to help resolve the crisis, something that his brother would just be like... unthinkable from Boris's standpoint. So the fact that he's changed his mind so much have led people to sort of like criticise him quite a bit. But it's certainly it's weird to see 2 Johnsons in the cabinet. Sorry, that sounded like a double entendre. I will.
Yes. Finally, bring us round to someone I'm sure you have some choice comments to make about. Your own MP, Jacob Rees-Mogg, is now Leader of the Commons.
Yeah.
I get the feeling from our previous conversations you're not a massive fan of your own MP there.
No, he's come in and he was, again, I keep saying this phrase, big cheerleader, but he really was, I follow him on Twitter, and from day one, and even before Boris Johnson announced his leadership and when Theresa May was still in charge, he was the one sort of saying that Boris Johnson would be a good leader, Boris Johnson would be a good leader. And as one of the more recognisable faces of the party, I think it was obvious he was going to find himself a role, even when Boris became leader and he was questioned, he said, "Oh no, I don't expect a cabinet position." He's somebody who always plays himself down before eventually, getting the reward. Leader of the House of Commons is quite a high profile role, and the one that will clash with BoJo the most, essentially. Leadsom and BoJo famously didn't get on that well, and they had some spicy exchanges. I think the exchanges between Rees-Mogg and BoJo will be pointed in a slightly different manner. We all know Jacob's mannerisms, the way he's sort of like we call him the Right Honourable MP from the 18th century, and that is a persona that he embraces and tries to imbue on the rest of the world. So he's already
6 children, the 6th of whom is called Sixtus.
Yes, precisely. So that whole persona will continue. He's already written for the Daily Telegraph. There was a photo of him on the front on Saturday, I believe, basically saying that I'll stop BoJo's shenanigans and stop him trying to, make sure nothing, MPs don't try and revoke Article 50. I'll make sure that doesn't happen. Also, in the most bizarre twist, he's announced his rules, his grammatical rules.
Oh, yes, I saw this, yeah.
Those reporting. It's a new style guide for all staff members in his new office, where MPs, all non-titled males must be called Esquire, double space after full stops, use imperial measurements, not metric, He's also given a list of banned words, which include very, using I too much, and disappointment. And this has already led to people doing a quick search of all Jacob's speeches within the House of Commons, which realises that he's already gone against these rules 700 times in the Commons. So good start, Jacob. But he's somebody who will always make headlines and will always find a way to put his own, literally his style on proceedings. That's what he's doing. This is a sort of it seems like a fun distraction for us, but it's kind of free PR for Jacob putting this stuff forward. So yes, I think we certainly won't see a shy and retiring leader of the House of Commons. We're likely to see his face again and quite prominently in the news in the coming few months.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he manages to get in the news a lot when he didn't really have a position outside of being an MP. So I will not be surprised if he's turning up from now on. And I do sometimes wonder, because he was very clear to say he didn't want to be leader of the Conservative Party. I do wonder if he's playing a very long game by backing someone like Boris, who can advance his kind of aims now, but then maybe that's the thing he'd want to do in a few years, but he felt like he shouldn't do it now and be like the person who gets tarred with Brexit going wrong. I mean, I don't know if he has the ability to actually believe that. Like, I don't honestly know. I don't know if it's so ingrained now that to him that Brexit will be amazing, because he said it would boost our economy by £80 billion, which is almost exactly the amount that I think it was 90 billion that we predict that it will actually negatively affect the economy. So, he's so far the other way. Maybe he does believe his own ideas at this point. You never know. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he's kind of angling a lot for a long game to become Prime Minister.
Yes. If you told me Boris Johnson would have been Prime Minister 6 years ago, I would have laughed at you. But, it's very real that we could see Jacob Rees-Mogg in a similar position in 6 years' time. So he's certainly good at getting PR for himself. That's all I'll say. I
know we spent a long while on the Cabinet there, but I think it was important. One last thing to mention is diversity in the current Cabinet.
There was quite a lot of discussion and promotion by the Conservative Party that this was the most diverse cabinet, particularly when you look at ethnicity. 4 full cabinet members come from BAME backgrounds, as well as 2 ministers who will attend cabinet. So that's 6 in total. So that's around about 17%. That puts it as one of the most diverse in recent history. So that's one point in its favour. But in some other aspects, it actually falls into some of the old school traps of not being that diverse. So it's majority male. I think it only has 24% of the cabinet is female, compared to Theresa May, who had 30%. Also, when you look at those who were privately educated, this is far more of a private school Oxbridge cabinet, which you'd expect with something led by Boris Johnson, who's basically getting all his mates in. So when Theresa May had her cabinet, 70% of them had gone to state schools. Under Boris Johnson, that number falls to 36%. Also, when you look at the amount of people who went to Oxford or Cambridge, Boris Johnson has 48% of people who went there. Theresa May only had 44%. You compare that to Tony Blair in 1997, who only had 16% of people who'd gone to Oxford or Cambridge. It shows that in a lot of ways, this is still quite old school cabinet. I know the Telegraph has already published an article saying that, this is a diverse cabinet, but not the diversity the left wants. That's quite an odd argument to make. I guess it is ethnically diverse, but when we talk about the policies of those people and what they reflect, I mean, in particular, Priti Patel is a BAME member of the cabinet, but we've already said that she strikes us as somebody who's certainly not liberal and might not strike you about like diversity in that way. She's somebody who wants to bring back the death penalty, for example. So that has been a cause for discussion, and I think on balance, I'd say it's still a Oxbridge boys club when you look at it on the whole. And the other claim from the Conservatives seems to be a bit of a distraction, but it's certainly something that Boris can point to at least and make headlines with, and it's certainly been a big discussion in the past few days around his cabinet. We've talked with how the cabinet made headlines and people have wanted to talk about it, and I think it's a real reflection of where the Conservative Party is going. You've got so many Brexiteers in that party. They're clearly looking to get the Brexit vote. How that'll play out, that we're yet to know.
So we've dealt with the cabinet quite extensively there, but I think it's probably it's one of the biggest changes in a cabinet in a long time. So I think it's important we've gone through the majority of those new ministers. Now on to the second part of the acronym, Unite. Is he talking about his party? Is he talking about the country?
So both in a way. And with both he finds like very real challenges. So first of all, the union. Boris has given himself the title of Minister of the Union, the first Prime Minister to do so in a while, and that's odd. That strikes me. It strikes me as somebody who's looking to promote an image but doesn't really have the evidence to back it up that that's what he's trying to do. Boris is very unpopular in Scotland, and for this you just have to look at the newspapers. In England, the Mail is pro-Boris, but in the Scottish Mail they run with the headline today of Ruth and Boris in Brexit showdown. Scotland on Sunday led with a headline of Boris, listen to Ruth, and has a beautifully photoshopped image of Ruth Davidson on the shoulder of Boris Johnson whispering into his ear. So yeah, Scotland is quite pro-Remain and anti-Brexit, and particularly when it comes to something like no deal, that's something that Scotland can shout about and, point to the figures and say, hey, when you look at, as a nation, all of our constituencies voted Remain. It's very clear that there is a majority for Remain in Scotland, and if you drag us out of Europe when we don't want to, then there's a good case for us having another referendum to try and leave the UK entirely and become our separate nation. This is something that scares Scottish Tories in particular. Ruth Davidson and the Scottish Conservative Party kind of saved Theresa May back in 2017. You forget that was a night where the Conservatives ended up losing seats across the country, and in fact the only place they really gained was in Scotland against the SNP, running on a pro-union ballot, basically saying that, the Conservatives are the party that will keep the country together and will fight for the union. If you want to vote, vote for us and send a message to the SNP that you want to remain part of the UK. Now Brexit is getting closer and closer. This causes, a real problem with Ruth Davidson going out with that same message. She can't say, vote for us to keep the country together, when people actually say, no, I'm not voting Conservative. You're going to do a no deal, and I voted Remain. Why would I vote for this hard Brexit party? With all of this in mind, his ability to keep the union together is under doubt. And that's not even mentioning the situation in Northern Ireland and the impact that scrapping the backstop or the possibility of a hard border between Northern Ireland and all the troubles that could cause. So, yeah, that's the first point of Boris's Unite point, and I think it's one where you can quite validly criticise him, or at least say he faces a big uphill struggle. I
mean, I get that the rhetoric of it sounds great, like it's a good optics is what they say, isn't it, in the media, like saying he's going to unite the country and all of that. It sounds great, and he can deliver it with that kind of charm that he's known for, but both, everything seems a bit fractured right now. And if Brexit goes into no deal, I don't think that's going to improve, as you say, and Scotland particularly, they want another referendum, as you mentioned. I feel like it wasn't his top thing, because, saying deliver Brexit, I feel is fairly easy for him to do. He can let a no deal happen. It's not necessarily going to be good for everyone, but it can just happen. Whereas this seems like a lot more work than he can reasonably achieve.
Yeah, certainly. And it's something that may, the Conservatives always had a trouble in Scotland, and they finally seem to have solved that Scotland problem back in 2017 with Ruth Davidson, who was quite a likeable and charismatic leader. And there were some in the party who sort of said, oh, she should, get out of Scottish politics and become an MP herself so she could run for leadership. That's something now which seems very distant, very unlikely, and something that, it's up to Boris how much he wants to keep the Scotland vote. Does he just say, no, I'm putting all my chips on the Brexit vote and getting that in, and that'll be enough to get me across the line? If it's not, and he ends up losing seats in Scotland and that costs him an election, he might regret that decision in the long term.
And what do you think about bringing his party together?
So he's had the He had the opposite effect of May. So when May came in, she first united the party back in 2016 as, I was a Remainer, but I will deliver Brexit. On the premise of sort of like, oh, this will be a softer Brexit, but this soft Brexit can probably command a majority within the Conservative Party that existed at that time. She messed that up with the 2017 election, essentially, that got a few more Brexiteers in the party and reduced her majority, and then she was left with a much harder conundrum. And after that election in particular, you saw the slow leaking of Brexiteers from her cabinet. People who, David Davis, Boris Johnson, Priti Patel, they all sort of left very slowly, and you could see a big divide in her party that was shown the most when it came to those big Brexit votes when she was trying to get her deal through. What Boris Johnson has done is he's temporarily united the party and particularly emboldened that Brexit wing to say, hey, when I bring my Brexit deal to the table, it'll be Brexity enough because I've got your back, so you'll definitely vote for it. Now, though, he's got to worry about those Remainers who exist within the Conservative Party who might vote against him, and he already knows they exist. So up to 42 Conservative MPs voted to stop no deal. That was a vote that happened on the 18th of July, so just, a few days before Boris was, put in as leader. He already had, he had people like Philip Hammond come out and say, there's no way I'll serve as Chancellor under Boris Johnson, so there's ex-people in there. Theresa May herself, I think, refused to speculate on if she would vote for no deal if it came up as an option, or if she'd support Boris's deal through the House of Commons. And one minister, or ex-minister, I should say, Alan Johnson, resigned from this cabinet position before Boris became PM, and then went to Burko on the same day to ask for a vote once Boris was put in charge to kind of see if the House supports the new PM. This was a very kind of soft vote of no confidence in Boris. It was not an official, like, you're going to become PM and then we will make you have the shortest reign ever by doing a vote of no confidence in you and stop you from even seeing the Queen. But if Johnson had lost a vote, and if that vote had gone to the Commons, and people knew that it had no official, like, kind of legal precedent for Boris having to step down, some Conservatives may have been more honest than they would have been, and that might have led to Johnson losing his first ever vote as PM. That would have been very embarrassing, would have immediately undermined him, and would have made a lot of people say, well, if you can't even garner support of your own party and they're not willing to stand behind you, then should you be leader at all? So on this aspect, I think it's still clear the Conservative Party is divided over Brexit. Johnson will try to unite them, and as we've said, he's got somebody like Nicky Morgan on board, who has been a part of former, like, pacts between the two sides of the party trying to get May's deal through. If this can hold, only time will tell. I think if he goes more and more down this no deal line, he'll find more people. Like, there's essentially like a group of 12 MPs who have always been those ones who stood against Theresa May and said, hey, we've got to have a vote on this, or hey, this is too much, this is too Brexity for me, we're not going to allow Brexit to happen, you've got to extend Article 50. That group, Johnson's not appealing to them at all. So his hope of uniting the party and getting them on board is almost non-existent. I think he will just hope that they will leave in the next election and he can then mould the party into a more sort of like Brexity, more right-wing party without those tricky members in there.
So next up is defeat. And I think this is very clearly a signal to his political rivals that he wants to defeat them. So we're talking Labour and Corbyn, really. You mentioned there was this kind of soft vote of confidence against him, and there's a very good website that I'm about to throw in the chat and will be in the show notes that kind of talks about what will happen next with Brexit. They've got a lot of flowcharts, and the first line of that flowchart is, does Boris survive his first week of PM and get to the recess over the summer? And it kind of, along this path, it covers things like, do we end up with a general election, etc. So I think I'm going to throw that in now so that we have that for discussion. How do we think he would fare if there was a general election right now? We've talked about this a bit with the polls, but
so I think it's worth just dipping into the polls right now and seeing the first ones that have come out. So I've got this open in front of me, and when you have a look, if we have a look at the big graph up the top, you can see that there is a clear Boris bounce. So where the Conservatives were kind of, on the 25th of June, they were languishing with about 21.8% of the vote, only 1% ahead of the Brexit Party. They've now bounced up, and on average, the Conservatives are on 25.4%, with Labour on 25%. Then the Lib Dem and Brexit parties are tied, both on 18.9%.
And it's interesting there, you look at that, you can see there's that Conservative bounce, and it's nearly exactly the same drop-off in the Brexit Party. Labour have had a bit of a dip, a very short-term dip, and that seems to have all gone towards the Lib Dems.
Yeah. And you'll see, there is a spike for the Lib Dems at the end there. What you're probably seeing here, in my opinion, is, Boris was put in to get the vote from the Brexit Party. He's already doing that. If you have a look at the latest poll since he became leader, so there's one from YouGov on the 26th of July that puts the Conservatives on 31% and Labour on 21%. So that's a lead of 10%, which was just unheard of, I think, before in recent months. The Conservatives will be very happy about that, and that's mainly due to the fact that the Brexit Party have slipped down to 13%. The one from Opinium as well puts the Conservatives on 30 and Labour on 28, with Lib Dems and Brexit on 16 and 15 respectively. That one also includes the Greens, so that might be why there shows a bit more of a split there. But if the Conservatives can keep polling at around about 30% and Labour struggle to get above 25 or 28, then the Conservatives will fancy their chances at the next election. But again, remember that a 2 percentage point swing is one that very easily can go either way. The Conservatives were able to waste a huge lead back in 2017, so why would Boris risk going for one now?
But definitely the kind of tone has shifted, because and maybe it's just because, we're like our own little echo chamber here. That's why we need more people in the chat to come and throw their opinions at us. But I feel like the last few months it's been very like, well, no one's going to call a general election. That would be crazy. And as soon as Boris got into power, I've suddenly heard more people talking about the possibility of a general election. I don't know if that's wishful thinking on their part, or if this bounce might be enough to convince someone that it's a good idea to go for the general election anyway. Has Boris made any statements on that, or do you have any feeling for that?
So Boris has already said, I believe today, that he said no election before Brexit. So I think what he's probably relying on there is that, if I'm the man to deliver Brexit, then I'll see an even bigger bounce than I did before. So if that happens, then I'll definitely call a general election. The Conservatives can win big. We can crush the other parties, move on. However, the other side of that coin is that no deal goes very wrong, and the Conservatives are out of power for the next 10 years while somebody else comes in and tries to clean up the mess. So, again, that's a big risk from Boris, but it's probably the only option that he's got. A few points to point towards if you want to see how the Conservatives are doing are the results of a by-election that will happen on August the 1st in Brecon and Radnorshire, which is in Wales. This is one that's of particular interest. This is one where the Lib Dems have formed a pact with the Greens, I believe, and the Greens aren't putting a candidate forward. So the Lib Dems are the one pro-Remain party on the ballot. They're hoping that the Brexit vote will be split between the Brexit Party, the Conservatives, and Labour. This will be a real test to see if the Conservatives are still taking votes away from the Brexit Party, or if that support for the Brexit Party is still holding up. So there's that to look for. That'll be another pointer for where the Conservatives are. I think the one point where Conservatives are confident in Boris's ability is his ability to sell things, to have a good election campaign. I think very few think that he will have as a disastrous campaign as May did back in 2017. Boris is gaffe prone, but somehow seems to be able to shake it off in just a way that May couldn't. Those personal gaffes don't seem to affect him. What will really hurt him is if, for whatever reason, the Conservatives can't deliver Brexit by October 31st. I think that would be quite a humiliating climb down for Boris, particularly after all his bluster before. Or if he's forced to go into no deal, and that goes very wrong, and it's clear that the country is not prepared, then his public perception could go down rapidly. So all PMs have a bounce. All new leaders tend to have a slight bounce in popularity because it's a new era for the party. I think it's too soon to say general election now. We've got to see how long this bounce lasts. If it carries on for the next 2-3 months, then maybe. But I think if it was 2-3 months, then it's too late to call election before the Brexit deadline. So yeah, I'm still sticking to my guns of no general election until Brexit is done. But I think we all got a bit carried away when Boris became leader. All the crazy things he was doing with the cabinet made me believe that, oh yeah, maybe he'll just call an election. Maybe he's that guy. But no, I think we're past that point right now.
So let's again, hypothetical general election does get called for whatever reason. How would Labour fight that now? I mean, it looks like they've suddenly had a dip and there's a bit more, people are going back to the Conservatives again. I mean, might be a bit strong to say that's going to last more than a few weeks, but maybe it will do okay through the summer recess if not much is actually happening and people are not really paying attention to politics for a month or two. So how would Labour position themselves in that setting?
Labour would love for the Brexit question to go away, and so they can attack the Conservatives of being the party of austerity and this being one of the most right-wing cabinets in history. That's how Labour would attack it. I think they would be strong on those points and they'd be able to really sell that. The big problem they've got is that they haven't been able to find a clear message on Brexit, even though they've confirmed they would do a referendum and they've confirmed that they would do everything in their power to stop no deal and stop a blue Brexit. They still haven't shaken this perception from the general public that they are Brexit party for some and a Remainer party for another bunch of people, and that struggle that loses them votes in other places around the country. So yeah, I think Labour will keep going along that anti-austerity, put forward the economic policies that gathered so much support from in the 2017 election, and hope that works again. But I think on a leader versus leader basis, Boris is the new guy. Corbyn's been there for a while. I think there was a certain charm and a certain sort of a new type of politics that came with supporting Jeremy Corbyn. Maybe some of that shine is gone right now. And if not many leaders in recent history have been able to fight a general election just after they've lost one. I think every sort of Labour leader who lost a general election then resigned, and the same with the Conservatives. So Corbyn running a second election campaign, it would be interesting to see how he does it. Does he change his message, or does he just stick to the one that sort of worked back in 2017? Yeah,
and I mean, a lot of that big swing they had in their favour before was partly because of that effect. It's new politics, and now someone's been sat there, and we've mentioned there's the problems with anti-Semitism in the Labour Party and so on, and I think a lot of people have probably started to get an impression that Jeremy Corbyn is a bit slow to do things, which people probably don't like, I would imagine, is the overall term. So I think there are people who maybe got swept up initially who wouldn't get swept up again.
Yeah, certainly. Labour will be worried about a general election right now. After Brexit's happened, I think they would be more bullish about their chances. But if it happens before October 31st, then I think they'd worry.
So our final point, and we've already done the polls, so this will be the final point before we wrap up for this evening. Energise. I mean, other than that kind of bounce to the polling numbers, has this cabinet shake-up, is this changing how the party is doing politics, at least? Or is this... I mean, the country definitely felt to be discussing politics again after a kind of period of just going, well, we're waiting around for Brexit to happen.
Yeah, I think it's at least... It's given the country a direction. If that's a direction I agree with, is another point entirely. But people will now feel that stuff is getting done. Points like Michael Gove said, oh no, I'm assuming no deal, and no deal preparations are going ahead. It feels like there really is a direction to Boris's leadership and a ruthlessness that some people would admire, and particularly those within the Conservative Party would say, oh, at least we're sort of moving forward with a plan, and we have a plan, rather than the sort of perceived muddleness and kind of insecurity of the May administration. How long this energy can last is another matter, and one thing I've sort of pointed out is an endless sort of optimism or mixed with sort of patriotism, this idea that you shouldn't talk down the country, that we're going to be optimistic about Brexit. This is something, this is a challenge to be embraced. This is an opportunity that we can do so much better at. Boris is bringing that sort of energy to the conversation, but I think that neglects some of the facts and some of the reality behind that as well. We've always talked on this podcast about how it's a Project Fear might actually be Project Reality, and that when genuine concerns are brought up about things about, like trading borders, or I saw a video that came from the Telegraph's very own Europe correspondent, that's somebody who you'd expect to be quite pro-Brexit, saying that, the UK is not prepared for no deal at ports. Boris Johnson says the ports are ready, but in reality, there's a lot of bureaucracy that goes on. You need to train these people up. It's not like training up security at Glastonbury. You can't just do it in a couple of months. This is a very technical procedure that will require loads more staff, and the UK hasn't done anything for that yet, and October is fastly approaching. It's what I call charge of the light brigade politics, which is kind of the belief that, if we just believed in the horses a little bit more, that they would have been fine against those cannons. The idea that, that you've got this kind of like, in my mind, an outdated system, this very like, Britain will win, Britain will do it because we're Britain and we're the best. That's all we're going into this fight with. And everybody else around us, the European Union, the WTO, everybody else is saying, no, mate, this is different. You've really got to think about this. You can't approach this with just guile and spirit. So, in conclusion, I think that he has energized the party, and will certainly energize a section of the country that believes Brexit is the way forward. If that will actually help us do any better out of the situation, in my opinion, certainly no.
Yeah, I think I probably have to agree that, I'm just now more worried about what's going to happen with Brexit, because we very much seem to be barreling off that cliff. We had a short respite, and now what's going to happen? Exactly what we thought was going to happen in March. So, yeah, not particularly full of confidence. So, yet another podcast ending on a down note. But yeah, as if you want to disagree with or agree with anything we said and have a chat with us, or you can find us on Twitter at Unpiled Podcast. You can also find us on Instagram at Unpiled Podcast. You can find us on Reddit at /r/unparliamentary. You can find us on Facebook as Unparliamentary Language. And you can find us on patreon.com/TTSS. Where you can donate money to this podcast and other shows on the TTSS network. We've got silly season coming up, as I said, so we've got some suggestions. We've had suggestions in from listeners. This was kind of a bonus episode we had to do because we thought Boris needed to be talked about. But yeah, we're going to do our bonus episodes now over silly season, and then we'll see you back to normal politics news when we have the end of the parliamentary recess over the summer. You can find us at parliamentary.observer if you want to come and comment on the episodes directly on the website, or you can also find the show notes there, or you can find them in whatever app you're using to listen to this podcast. And with that, I think it's good night from me.
And it's a good night from him. Bye.
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 Bye. Hey, have a note, because I've been singing this weekend.
Oh, I put link to Manifesto in my notes, and then didn't put link to her manifesto. That's good, isn't it?
It's all right. I'm on it.
Thank you.